Welcome, welcome, welcome to Week Old Beans episode 30.
6.
36. I'm I'm Ardon, and I have with me here my co-host. Introduce yourself.
I am Fowler. I am the one who remembers which podcast episode we're on each week.
You know what? That's about all you contribute, and we're glad for it. Fowler is a little bit under the weather, so if he seems less enthusiastic, then I have to apologize on his behalf. Because you sound exhausted, Fowler. Why don't you tell?
Long week, I suppose.
Yeah. Why don't you tell the people what we're going to talk about?
Ardot, we literally agreed you would do
No, you said I had to do the opening, and now I'm handing it over to you so you can talk a little bit. Equal exchange. So why don't you give a short summary about what we're going to talk about, and then I'll start off. How about that?
Sounds good. We're talking about the media and how they cannot seem to concentrate on more than one or two things at a time, and how this definitely is a downside if you have a massive border dispute that could become a national crisis. You have a war in Ukraine that will largely determine, whether the Russians keep attacking Europe, and we also have the genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to digest, a lot to unpack and talk about. Um, we are witnessing. I mean, this is like hyper late stage capitalism. I mean, I hate to invoke capitalism as a critique. I know it's kind of cliche to do that, but I'm going to do it because it's the only word we got that sums up what's happening. Um, it's along with what I would say is just a breakdown of the traditional media apparatus. I mean, Fowler, wasn't it you that told me? We're going back to a conversation that you and I had a long time ago. But I believe you mentioned to me several months ago. You kind of walked me through. We were talking about the media and talking about independent new media, and you sort of walked me through like the fact that the traditional media, like the ways in which media companies utilize journalists, has changed completely. Do you remember that conversation?
I don't. What did I say?
I
What
think you
brilliant
said
things did I
you said.
miss?
Let me try to tap your memory here. You said something along the lines of like it used to be that journalists would have direct links to um sort of different like social and political um groups, and now that's not the case. Um,
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. I read a book called The Bully Pulpit by this historian, and she talked about how it came from Teddy Roosevelt, the president, and they talked about how he was extremely good at like manipulating the press, getting his name out there, and getting his messaging out there, and um, decentralized, and there is so much media,
Hang
and
on,
also
Fowler.
the
Repeat
media
that
that
last
does
sentence.
exist.
Fowler, repeat that last sentence. You cut out a little bit. The media is decentralized. What did you say right before that?
I said the Bully Pulpit's basically a book about how Teddy Roosevelt was able to control the press, and like he's kind of the person who kind of led to the beginning of like the White House press corps and like having like kind of 24/7 press around the presidency, and he's kind of the first one to use the office of the presidency to inject himself into the news. And she kind of says that like while that's still possible today, the media is so decentralized and so polarized and so partisan that it's much more difficult to actually control the narrative than it was before. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. It's and I think that can pose. I think we're seeing it with the Biden administration. I mean, right before we started the podcast, Fowler and I were talking about Kamala Harris. A lot of people shit on her. A lot of people say she doesn't do anything. a lot, and I question that narrative. I've started questioning that narrative in large part because, you know, is it that she doesn't do anything, or is it that the news doesn't constantly focus on her 24/7 like we're used to? Um, and, I say this because she just managed to get Alaska to be the 44th state to pass an expansion of pregnancy Medicaid. So in most states, pregnancy when a woman is pregnant who is on Medicaid, she could get pregnancy Medicaid, um, which basically means she's covered while she's pregnant, for the 9 months, and then she has the pregnancy Medicaid 2 months after she gives birth to the baby, and that is wholly, inefficient because most women have complications. I mean, you can have pregnancy complications after you give birth, and most women who die of post pregnancy complications die within a year. There are there are tons of health changes that a woman goes through when she has a baby. And, 2 months after you give birth is not enough time. It's not enough time for you to recover. It's not enough time for you to sort of bounce back and get fully healthy. And that should be the goal after you have a baby, is not just caring for the baby, but it should be getting healthy and getting, back to, um, getting your body healed and ready to continue on with whatever it is you're trying to do. If you're on Medicaid for 2 months after you give birth, that's not enough time. And like I just said, most women die of post pregnancy complications a year after they give birth. So for her to manage to get 44 states to expand pregnancy Medicaid, that's going to save people's lives. It's going to save thousands and thousands and thousands of women from potential serious post pregnancy complications, along with postpartum depression as well. Um, since I believe you can use Medicaid for mental health services, um, which is huge, that's massive. That's a big deal. But I've not heard a lick of it on the mainstream media. I've not heard it be shouted from the rooftops, and I don't know if that is the Biden administration's inability to communicate, because I do believe the Biden administration is struggling with the way that they communicate, or if that's just, like I think traditionally 7 or 8 years ago that would be something that the mainstream media would pick up on, but they're just they're not able to juggle these different narratives, juggle these different events that are happening. Which I think,
Part of it is that Joe Biden hates Kamala Harris and constantly seeks to delegitimize her and slander her and give her suicide missions, i.e., when he made her be in charge of the border and then gave her
which
no
is
authority to fix the
which is
border.
not helping, because
Yep.
now I mean, like, the funny thing about that is that it's not helping him, because now the heat is on him as an individual because he's the president, not on her. Um, and the
Yeah, who would have
Republicans were
thought? Who would have thought handing a highly complicated suicide mission to someone that's not very competent and that you don't like would be a bad idea?
Well, it's not even Kamala's fault. It's not even that she's not competent. It's that she doesn't have the authority to pass any sort of meaningful legislation. In regards to the border, she can't pass executive orders. She can't pass bills. I mean, there was nothing she was going to be able to do to begin with. And I think a lot of people, including Republicans, were aware of that. And also, she's not the target. She's not running against Donald Trump. Um,
I
but
think Biden did that, and he also, I think, screwed over Buttigieg because I think if you look at the evidence, Biden has known for a long time. Like he claimed when he was running in 2024 that he wasn't going to run for re-election, but it's pretty obvious that for the past 3 years he's been quietly consolidating power. The way he rigged the primary systems, the way he's sort of handed these like nuclear footballs to other moderates within his party so that they're damaged politically. Like it seems very clear to me that he's been quietly eliminating or damaging everyone that could potentially replace him within the party as like a moderate to be the president.
yeah,
Biden definitely wants to hold on to power.
absolutely. Um, absolutely. I don't disagree with that. He fucked himself with the border situation, though, because the Republican Party, since he is running for re-election, they're not putting the heat on Kamala Harris for not fixing the border. I've not heard a single person, both online, and in the mainstream, offer critique towards Kamala Harris about the border. The heat is on Biden for that. And so he
Now, but back in the day, it definitely was focused on her. Like I
well,
think that on a short term.
speaking of attention span, like, I think this is a good indicator of how shitty our attention spans are. I think you're absolutely right. The heat was on her, but nobody cares about that anymore. What we care about is what's happening right now. Um, we have America, and I think it's, I think America has a problem with amnesia. I think we are amnesiatic about things. I think we're amnesiatic about our history. I think there's a deliberate. I mean, I think it's deliberate. I think if you make your people amnesiac about history, then they're easier to control and easier to lie to. Um,
I
but
think the last time that a president, in a modern sense, was able to completely control the media narrative was probably Bush with Iraq, where like the Democrats voted for the Iraq War, the Republicans voted for the Iraq War, the media was pro Iraq War. I mean, the hysteria was so high that there were a lot of really high level journalists and news commentators who were basically shit canned by their media companies for pointing out the very real contradictions and lies about the war. But I don't think anyone has really had a monopoly. And I mean, 9/11 was the worst terrorist attack, definitely in modern history. I don't know how
it is
domestically.
it is considered
I don't know
it
if it
is.
compares to. I don't know how it compares to Pearl Harbor, but
Oh,
that
it
was like I think a very
no,
exceptional
you're
circumstance
the 9/11 terrorist attack is the worst terrorist attack committed in the history of terrorist attacks. Like, I'm not
in
even.
the United States, right?
I think in the world, actually. Hang on, let me look that up. I actually think it is considered the worst terrorist attack in the history of the world. Um,
Yeah, but that was sort of an exceptional circumstance on Bush's part. But I don't know if you can really capture the media narrative in the same way anymore. Like I think it's been a really long time. I mean, LBJ during Vietnam or Truman during Korea, like neither of them were really able to control the narrative ultimately. Like they were both, I mean, really destroyed by those wars. It's just I think it's just a very different world. But
okay,
I mean,
yeah.
if you look at
Um,
history, that wasn't really the case.
yeah, the 9/11 is the worst terrorist attack in human history. Has the highest
hmm.
body count. And then also, that's direct body count, and then some people add the, thousands of people that died from complications in the decades following. So yeah, it was an exceptional circumstance, you know. Um, like you said. But I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if someone can capture the bully pulpit again in the way that Teddy Roosevelt did. I don't know. I think the problem right now is like there's so many issues happening: the Ukraine war, the Israel Gaza war, the Mexican border standoff. Like there's just so much happening right now, and I think the press has just been really really bad at being able to focus on all those things competently and keep them all within
Knowledge,
the
yeah.
public's perception.
Well, and then if you the issue with independent media is that independent media is very good about finding those niche issues and covering them, but depending on what political party you vote for and depending on what your political leanings are, you can fall into an echo chamber. If you're someone who's a conservative, you very much are concerned about the border. You probably don't give a shit about Ukraine. I mean, that seems to be the take that conservatives are very, very, very concerned about the border, which they have a right to be. They're very concerned about what's going on the southern border, and the Ukraine stuff is kind of on the back end. And that I don't think it's because they don't have an opinion about Ukraine. I think many of them do have opinions about Ukraine, but I think it's because the media they consume is going to be focused heavily on the border. I mean, Fox News is nonstop every day, border, 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 border. If you watch more moderate Democrat news, they're probably talking about Israel and Hamas, Israel and Palestine, and they're probably talking.
Or I think the shift after Navalny's death is like Ukraine.
Yeah,
It's
and
very
now it's back to
interesting because
Ukraine.
all of the different factions of politics are focusing on different things. Like the Republicans, it's just the border. If you watch any sort of progressive democratic media, it's the war. Like I don't know a single kind of lefty news source, especially online, that does not cover the war every day in Gaza. And then the moderates, their project seems to be being worried about Putin
Russia.
and worried about Ukraine. Yeah, so it's very interesting.
Yeah. It's definitely heavily tied to what sort of media you consume. And I think that's part of why it's really difficult for whoever's in power to capture the attention. I mean, Trump captured the attention of the media directly. I mean, Trump was covered all the time by every facet of the news, and but that was because Trump was an anomaly. I mean, he for the first probably 2 years of his presidency was every single day was in some way, shape, or form putting himself on the news. He was not doing it strategically. It was not like the bully pulpit where he had a strategic plan to capture media attention. He was just being fucking psycho, and and that generated media attention, negative, positive, and in between, from every facet of the American sort of news media empire.
But we see the downside of that strategy now,
Exactly,
though, in that like
exactly,
Trump was able to be in the media constantly, but he never really maintained control of how the media perceived him,
exactly.
and the media mainly painted him as an incompetent, corrupt moron. And then also, I think this has really led to a lot of his problems with like him being essentially no man's land for independents and Democrats. Like his media profile really damaged him. I think another example of a figure who's like that is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene is in the news like every 2 or 3 weeks, but like she's largely in the news because she's framed as the stupidest person in Congress. So
Outside of
that
Lauren
doesn't really
Boebert,
help her.
besides Lauren Boebert.
Well, hopefully in November she'll get shit canned. I think she's down like 20 points as the incumbent, which is not a good sign.
No. Well, Colorado. I read something where people in Colorado are apparently very fed up with her being a laughingstock. So I don't know about the folks in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. I mean, I won't dox myself, but I could probably find out. But um, I don't know. I have no idea. I've not seen her poll ratings. I don't know what's happening with her, but um, I have no clue. But yeah, the consolidation of media is uh it's very interesting. The way the media has been operating over the past, that's a year and a half. It is like a weird amnesiatic slash like ADHD inability to pinpoint what's going on, and it's definitely fragmented based on what you um on what political sphere you fall under.
Yeah, I wish progressives were better about being able to concentrate on other things. Like, I mean, there are some progressives that now realize the border is a problem, but they were kind of ignoring it for many, many years during the early Biden administration. And then they just don't seem to give a shit about Ukraine, which I find very peculiar because like there was a lot of early progressive support for the Ukrainians as like pro democracy against fascism. But
Ha!
um,
Should I
I
say
think
my hot take?
you can say your hot take.
With the hot take I told you yesterday, am I gonna get in trouble for my hot take? You think? I think I will
Or not,
say my hot
you have
take.
to. If you're gonna fly, you should fly close to
Fly
the
hard.
sun. There's no reason.
Oh God. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna say it. All right. I'm gonna say it. Um. I'm gonna say it. Many of the radical leftists perceive Ukrainians to be white, and therefore they don't give a fuck about it. Um.
Well, they cared at the beginning before the Gaza war. I
Yeah. Now
feel
that the
like.
Gaza war is now that it's what's happening in Gaza is I'm not gonna say my whole take because I actually kind of forgot. I said it yesterday, but I can't fully say it as accurately and as passionately as I said it yesterday, and so I don't want to get into it half-assed. But um the stuff in Gaza takes precedent, um or takes prevalence. Uh, Partially because it's been a bubbling issue. Like before October 7th, there was like the plight of the Palestinian people was something that was, if you were a leftist before October 7th, you knew about Palestine. You knew Palestine has had much representation in left wing circles, but not mainstream circles. Um, I would also say that's part of it. I mean, not to completely impugn leftists for being anti-white, although I think many of them are. It's also because Palestine has been an issue that has been talked about by leftists for years, and it has gone unnoticed by the mainstream until October 7th, when Hamas decided to put themselves on the map, and now, as we just talked about, when it comes to the media, for better or for worse, they are in it now. And civilians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are suffering the consequences. So, I would also say that's part of it too. Um,
Hmm.
I wouldn't just say that it's a sort of racial, like a weird. I don't mean to really heavily racialize it, because I think that's part of it, but not the whole thing. Um, you have any add-ons to that, Fowler?
I think I don't know. I think a lot of progressives, and this is a frustration that we've talked about before, like the Iraq War made a lot of them isolationists, and I think a lot of progressives are worried about ramping up rhetoric or like action against the Chinese or the Russians because they basically are afraid of re-entering a Cold War, or maybe even worse, entering a hot war. And I think in some ways it's made them quite deluded. Like I know Jacobin and Secular Talk and a couple of those sort of outlets were, um, they're basically, or Hassan was another one, where they basically were saying like there's no possible way the Russians were going to attack Ukraine. And then once they attacked Ukraine, there's no way the Russians wanted all of Ukraine or were wanting to keep going. So I don't know, I think it's sort of a protective mechanism in a sense. I think
Yeah,
a
well,
lot of them are kind of afraid of what they would have to believe and what would have to happen if the Russians and the Chinese truly did have expansionist goals. And I would argue that it's pretty undeniable at this point that like Putin and Xi are both people who have expansionist goals.
yeah, absolutely. It's an unholy combination of America bad. Um, like America is the worst. We hate America. So we're gonna unironically be more lenient towards other, colonialist settler empires. I mean, I don't. I think there's a perception of Russia as being sort of a hegemony, but Russia has many ethnic minorities, and those ethnic minorities, while they don't make up a large percentage of Russia's population, those ethnic minorities were the first to be sent to die in Ukraine, deliberately. Um, and then not to mention the Han supremacy of the CCP, and how the CCP feels like, if you are someone who is of Han Chinese descent, regardless of whether or not you live in China, you have to be subjected to some sort of Han ethnic, like Han ethnic supremacy. I mean, the CCP got caught basically trying to police people in California, just last year. This was a real story. People in California were busted for trying to police other Chinese Americans on behalf of the CCP. Um, so both these groups, the China and Russia. I mean, I like America because I live here. I mean, I feel like I have common sense enough to at least like the country that I live in, and want the country that I live in to not be fucked over. Um, but I can't really say the same for a lot of the online left. Um, I think America, which between Russia and China is the only democracy, is a pretty dope place to live if you like being able to effectively change your government. Uh, if I didn't, I would move to a country where I was not allowed to vote and have rights, but I don't. So I choose to be pro America. Even if we have our faults, which we most definitely do. Not sucking the sack of Uncle Sam here, but I think we do have a lot going for us that's good, that I would like to see not fucked over. But So I think that's part of it. I think it's partially, America bad. And then I also think it's partially, like Fowler just said, PTSD from Iraq and Afghanistan and this sort of reluctance to engage in broader geopolitics out of fear of a Cold War or worse, a hot war. Um, but as I feel like, if you're going to call yourself a leftist or call yourself someone of the left, I mean, the left has only really survived through international efforts and international cooperation. So going back to this weird isolationist desire, which would require, by the way, to not engage in discourse surrounding Israel and Palestine, because Israel and Palestine is a global conversation. Um, they make an
I
exception
think
of
it's a
that.
moderation thing. I'm glad we're talking about the Israelis and the
I am
Palestinians.
too.
Like I think that's a positive. But I do wish the news was more about Ukraine. I'm not sure. We talked about this I think 2 days ago, but like I'm not sure. I'm not sure Americans really give a shit about foreign policy in any way. Like it's very surprising to me how like the Republicans are. I mean, the Republicans are insane, but they are basically overtly pro Orban and pro Putin and pro Xi and pro like these strongmen. But like I don't know, the Democratic leadership, the moderate Democratic leadership who want to back the Ukrainians, they've been trying to like stir up the public by pointing out what a monster Putin is and sort of trying to get people to rally around the flag to support Ukraine. And it just doesn't seem to be working for some reason.
I
I
think
don't
it's
really know
really
why.
difficult. I mean, I think my argument would be, or my reasoning would be, I think it's very difficult to get your people to care about foreign policy when your own house is not in order. I hate to use that phrase, but I think it's very difficult to get people to fear Putin, which people should fear Putin, and people should be cautious and afraid of what Putin can do. But I think it's very hard when the current frontrunner for the Republican nomination for president and the person who's going to run against Joe Biden most definitely is an open fascist. I think it's just very difficult to get the news to, I think Americans are really good about caring about foreign policy when we have the means to support ourselves, but many Americans do not have the means to support themselves anymore. Many Americans cannot put food on the table. They can't there's the economy is going strong, but it's not bouncing back as quickly as everybody would like. I mean, there's still a lot of internal problems within the United States that were not around, when we first engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan, or even back during, after the New Deal was passed and America was starting to enter World War II. That was a time when we were very isolationist and very reluctant, and but that was a time when there was a relative amount of stability in the United States, and people felt like they could, they were willing to sacrifice, they were willing to, have their men go over to Europe and the women take charge of the factories. I don't think that willingness is there. I don't think the willingness and I don't even think it's the willingness. I think it's the ability. Um, I don't think the climate is there. I don't think the political and media climate is there to facilitate, mass action. Um, and so I think that's part of it. I don't really think it's that Americans, so there's just something fundamentally broken about Americans and our capacity to care about foreign policy, because we have cared about foreign policy before in the past and we've been willing to engage geopolitically. Um, Americans give the most out of any country to international charity organizations. And that's partially because we have all the wealth. But, um, when it comes to global politics, we're relatively involved, I feel like. But I think it's just really hard when, like I just said, your house is not in order. Um, that's not an excuse to not care. I'm not saying that that's the excuse that should be used to not care about foreign policy. I'm simply just, I think, explaining why that's the case.
Yeah, I would agree. Although, there have been other presidents who I feel like have been able to navigate that. Like FDR is a good example of like, he was able to deal with the Great Depression and kind of rebuild the economy, but he was also able to motivate enough Americans to give a shit about World War II and understand that like um if fascism took over the entirety of Europe, that would be bad for everyone.
Yeah. And I think, again, like education, there's so many things that play a role in it, I think. Like, I think I mean, it's just such a different time. You know, our economy is more intertwined now with Europe and the rest of the world than it was during World War II. So there is actually more of an incentive people should have to give a shit about foreign policy now, because so much of so much of our economy is tied to this sort of globalist. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just using a adjective. Um, the sort of globalist system that everybody interacts with on a day to day basis. Um, so people should care about foreign policy more than they probably should have cared back during the 1930s and 40s. But it just seems like, I think a lot of it's education. I think a lot of it is education. Um, Nobody knows how the economy works. I mean, I certainly can't sit here and say I'm an economist. I couldn't tell you how these global trade routes operate. Um, speaking of left wing people, I mean, did you? We didn't really even talk about this when it happened, but the online left was being particularly stupid about the Houthi stuff. Um, when they're still attacking ships, but when the Houthis were attacking ships near Yemen,
You might want to go into more details about who
yeah,
the
well,
Houthis are, because I think that was not a
we didn't
news
really,
story outside the online left.
yeah, we didn't really cover it, but I mean, it was covered outside the online left, but not again short attention span, but. I think it was a couple months ago. I'm not going to get into the full thing. Obviously, the Houthis, quote unquote, pirates, sort of, I guess, Islamic jihadist pirates. They've been sort of an issue in the different canals and different trade routes in the Red Sea, I believe. I think it's the Red Sea. Yeah.
The
Um,
Houthis are, just to be clear in a big picture context, they're essentially they basically control most of Yemen. They're
yes.
like a terrorist jihadist group that I think there is a Yemenis official government, but the Houthis control way more territory. And the big thing the Houthis are infamous for is, I believe it's the Red Sea.
Yeah, it is the
They
Red Sea.
use drones to find ships in the Red Sea. I think it's like 10% of all ocean cargo goes to the Red Sea, and they use drones to figure out where the Red Sea is, and then they drive boats over to those cargo freighters basically, and then they usually destroy them or take them hostage.
Yeah. So they started really amping up. This was after people were connecting it to Israel and to the stuff that was going on in Palestine, and I think part of it was connected to that. They started to increase their attacks on U.S. ships um, in the Red Sea during the sort of initial instability that was going on in that region, and the United States, along with a couple other European countries, started to drone strike. I think in Yemen against the Houthis in on the mainland, and then also they started to blow the fuck up out of some Houthi ships in the Red Sea. And this was obviously mainstream, pretty typical terrorists attacking ships. The online left treated this shit like it was like rocket science. And, the argument that was made by, I think it was Vosh that made this argument. He was the only one that seemed to be taking the situation relatively intelligently. He made the point to say, well, these trade routes need to be open, right? Disrupting international trade, like regardless of who's doing it, is a problem, and there has to be a response. And the response it was a global response. It was Europe and the United States. Um, you can't just allow ships to be hijacked when you have a global trade route where, a lot of these ships were carrying very important material across the world. Um, and I think that's true. I mean, I hate to, if it makes me a bad leftist, I'm sorry. Or it makes me a bad person on the left, I'm sorry. I don't give a shit who you are. I don't give a shit if you're a jihadist. I don't give a fuck if you're a Christian nationalist. I don't give a fuck who you are. Disrupting international trade is a no-go, and you will be dealt with accordingly. Um, and that's just the way it is. Um, because these trade routes being
The
open.
Houthis are also not really progressives. I mean, I feel mixed about this to some degree. I mean, we argued this about Navalny, where like if Navalny was not in Russia, if he was like a from a Western democracy, he would very much be the enemy of any progressive. Um, so I think you do have to understand the context of where people live. But the Houthis are like monstrous. They're jihadists. I believe in their official party platform, they call for the death of Jews, and they have child soldiers, and they engage in slavery. Like they're very much
No bueno.
yeah.
No. So, like, it definitely, if you're a leftist who just thinks that, every brown person is innocent, and that every person with a darker skin tone is victimized and should not suffer any sort of consequence for their actions. I hate to say it, bro. Um, that's just not how the world works. Obviously the situation in Yemen is horrible, and the United States perpetuates it, and has facilitated a lot of the problems there. But again, like, I see this a lot, and I don't really know how I feel about it. And Fowler, you might be able to offer some insight. I see this a lot from people on the left. They'll say, they'll make a statement. They'll say the United States fucked up the Middle East, and that is an objectively true statement. They'll say the United States fucked up the Middle East, therefore, when people like the Houthis or ISIS do crazy shit, um, it is wrong for the United States to respond in any meaningful way, because the U.S. caused the situation, and therefore any action taken by America, um, is bad. And I think this is, like we talked about, a trigger response from the Iraq War, because the United States' presence in the Middle East since, uh, the Iraq War has been nothing but a shit show. Uh, not a lot, not nothing really good has come of it. Would you agree with that, or do you have any alternative explanations or thoughts about that? I see this
I think
rhetoric a lot, and I don't know how to really parse it, because it's like, on one hand, it's like, yeah, like the United States did facilitate fucking up Yemen, but also like the Houthis can't fuck with international trade.
I don't know because I think it's complicated where you do have to take responsibility. Colin Powell famously said like if you buy it you break it in regards to like colonization and imperialism. Ironically, he would be an architect in the Iraq War. So I think it's kind of insane to not understand like the historical consequences of what you've done and why the situation is the way it is. But I don't know. On the other hand, I think you have to work for what you have, and I also think like we do have kind of a moral obligation, not just a strategic um, duty, but we have a moral obligation if we have severely damaged the quality of life and democracy in certain parts of the world to try and stabilize it because
Yeah,
we are the last superpower, and if we don't do it, then I really think nothing will happen.
yeah.
Basically,
Well, it's. I mean, if we don't do it, Russia's going to try to do it, which they tried to do it, and that didn't work out. Or China's going to try to do it, and between the two of them, they don't have very good track records for democracy building anywhere in the world. Neither do we. However, at least we like. If you ask the average American, do you want democracy in the middle? They'll be like, yeah, like like there's at least like a precedent for us establishing democracy in other countries. We've done it before, um, just not within the past probably 40 years. Um, and I think it's kind of unironically like the great quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I think the issue with like a situation like the Houthis is like, if they start fucking with international trade routes, the only people in that region, I mean, there's nobody in that region that really has the capabilities to stop it in the same way. So in a weird way, being the center of power means being the center of power. When something like that happens, the countries that have the power to stop it are also going to be the countries that facilitated the fuck ups in the first place. Um, and I think it creates a really difficult narrative and a really difficult situation to kind of deal with moralistically. If you're someone who wants to have a moral stance on it, I think it makes it hard when like the people with the power are the people that cause the problem, but then the people with the power are the people that can fix the problem. Um, you know what I mean? It's how I feel about
I
Israel
see
and
what you mean.
Palestine. The Palestinians cannot really do anything to effectively fix their situation. They did not, because they were not the ones who want. I mean, they were not the ones who caused their situation to begin with. It was Israel. It's always been Israel, and so it's Israel's responsibility, to fix it. It's not going to be the Palestinian people's. They're not going to be able to. They don't have the fucking manpower. They don't have the fucking numbers. They don't have the political power, the social power, the economic power to like fix their situation. Um, Israel's going to have to want to fix it and want to do it. Um, and they've proven, that they really are not willing to do that.
The other thing is, I mean, they are killing the Palestinians with our bombs and our bullets and our
Exactly. We
guns. Like
also, yeah,
it's
and we enable that. Is also our responsibility because we have consistently enabled that behavior for decades. Um,
yeah, I think both parties definitely have blood on their hands. The Republicans, if Ukraine falls, like their legacy in our generation will be that they helped destroy democracies in Europe and that they destabilized NATO and sort of the alliance between all of the Western powers to protect each other. And certainly, I mean, Biden, I don't know if it's his Vietnam, but Biden's legacy will always be tied to his support of um, the vicious demagogue Netanyahu and the genocide that he inflicted upon, an already terrorized people.
yeah, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Well, this was good. We're at 41. You want to go ahead and cut it off, or you want to talk about something else? We were
Why
struggling to
don't we
find
cut
a
it off?
topic.
Because we've been doing a lot of long ones recently, I think.
Yeah, we were struggling to find a topic to talk about. So I'm glad we managed to have a decent one. So, you have any closing words, Fowler?
Don't attack cargo ships in the Red Sea.
Yeah, let's not do that. I mean, I that story flew under the radar. Um, it came and it went, and I don't know really what's going on with it now, or if there's been any new developments. But yeah, if you
I'm pretty
have,
sure. I'm pretty sure. The last time I checked, they're still attacking
yeah,
ships.
it's
I
still
think the Houthis. I might be wrong about this. I think the Houthis like piracy is a fairly large part of their economy. Like I think even without the war
it would still be
in Israel,
wilding out.
they probably would have continued attacking ships anyway. I
Imagine.
know they got into trouble because they're allied with the Russians and they accidentally attacked a couple Russian ships.
I love that for them, unironically. Just operating in 1750. Just fucking just fucking being pirates in 2024. Um ugh. Anyway, I'm kidding. I'm not just to clarify. Um just to clarify. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that. Don't do drugs. Don't attack ships in the Red Sea. Unless you want to take a drone strike to the face. Because that's what happened. They just drone strike the fuck out of so many ships. Um, if your Fashion Nova order is late, that's probably why. So don't cry about it, America. Um, but thank you. Oh god, I need to go eat my beef stew. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.